Hi, Deshun.
Hey Juanita, how are you doing?
I'm fabulous. How are you?
Very good, thank you. It's fantastic to have all this time to work through our digital game. And thank you for inviting me to be one of your contributors.
Of course, not a problem at all. I'm very excited to have you here because whenever I've heard you speak about your time on the mountains and how you get it done, my thoughts have always been how on earth, in the face of these massive disappointments, do you just keep going and then you come out of it and you create something called the peak performance toolkit? How do you not get knocked down in those circumstances? And that's what I want to explore in our chat right now. So just explain maybe what these disappointments are that I'm referring to.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because it really is not even a case of how do you not get knocked down. You do get knocked down. That's the whole point, is that mountains provide a huge challenge to a climber to overcome all kinds of big things like the weather and illness. People get sick on mountains as well. The prospect of not making it to a summit for all kinds of different reasons, but also your internal stuff, how you manage your thought process when you're cold and you've been climbing for 10 hours and there's at least 2 more hours to go, and you've got blisters and you're just in huge discomfort. So for me, it's about, oftentimes when we think about climbing, we think about the outer, the external factors involved, the weather, the snowstorm, the terrain itself. But for me, it really comes down to how do you manage the inner self in order to overcome when you get knocked down.
And just to clarify, here we're not talking about a gentle stroll to the Drakensberg in the middle of South African winter, July, right? We're talking about a mountain that's a little bit bigger.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a high altitude mountaineer, so most of the climbs I've been on are over 5,000 meters, and in fact, most over 6,000. And so, yes, it is high altitude. It's a very little oxygen, it's thin air. Your body gets tested in ways that it will not normally be tested under normal circumstances. And you've got to find ways to cope and to keep focused and to still achieve quite good results under those circumstances. So if there is any place in the world where one can test your resilience, your ability to focus for long, long periods of time, and your ability to kind of hold yourself together under extreme conditions, then high altitude mountaineering is one of those spaces.
So how many times have you now attempted to summit? Because as I understand it, there hasn't been a summit yet, and that's the disappointment that frustrates me so much on your behalf. How many attempts have you had to summit Mount Everest?
So I've been on 2 Mount Everest expeditions so far. They were quite far apart, but each time, the first time I wasn't on the climbing permit, so I managed to get a climbing permit quite late in the season. That was with the first South African expedition to Mount Everest, which is now 24 years ago. And the second time I went to Everest was in 2003. We had a 7 Summits campaign, and I was well on my way to the summit. I turned around at 550 meters vertical before the summit, and it was bad weather. It was my second summit attempt in that year, so you could say 2 expeditions but three attempts to the summit, which is very disappointing because I was good to go. I had my oxygen on, I had a great season, I looked after myself, my body was good to go, and then the weather came along and said, nope, you're going to turn around this time.
And this latest attempt was wiped off due to the current COVID-19 concerns, correct?
Yes, so we had a team that was planning and equipping ourselves to go to Everest this year, 2020. And it was meant to be the first all-female South African team. We were well on our way and, still doing quite a bit of campaigning to get the last bit of funds in until Nepal announced that it's locking down. So there's no access to any of the mountains in Nepal for the climbing season in 2020. So that was a disappointment as well.
So let's get to the solution in the face of all of these disappointments, which doesn't come with little bits of effort and little bits of expense and little bits of sacrifice, but it's how long does it take you to prepare for a summit, for a climb?
For my last 2 expeditions to Everest, I started well in advance, about 18 months. You start training yourself, with an incremental program to get to ultimate fitness and strength by the time you leave. And so it was an 18-month relentless program of just physical training. And then there's obviously a whole bunch of funds that go into it. So we self-funded quite a big part of our journey as a team. And, just on a very basic level, to just do some of the training climbs, for instance, costs well over 300,000 Rand. And that's been our expense, so it's 18 months of hard focus, physical prep, and then of course the money that you had to spend. Fortunately, I had a very small sponsorship in terms of financial contribution to help with the expenses of the lead up to Everest. But Everest itself is also about 1.2 million Rand per person. In dollar terms, that's about 65,000 US dollars. So it's not a light undertaking.
Not by any means at all. So how on earth, in this not light undertaking, when you get the calls, or when the call is made on the mountain that this is not going to happen, your 18 months of physical training investment and your inner game and your mental preparation and the financial expense, it's just not going to happen. How do you not curl up in a ball and just not wake up again and just not start again? How on earth do you get that done?
Yeah, I'll take you on a journey to the last time I was above 8,000 meters on Mount Everest, and it was pitch dark. It was 11 o'clock at night. We were heading for the summit. I could only hear my breathing through my oxygen tank and see the little light that your head torch sort of creates for you right in front of your step. It was under very tough circumstances, and the wind had already picked up quite significantly by then, that my Sherpa and I had to actually scream at each other to understand each other. And I remember going for quite a bit and seeing a lot of climbers deciding to turn around already, but I was in good shape, so I kept going. And I eventually kind of got to a point where I said to the Sherpa, do you think we should also turn around? And he said, it's your call, So that's the thing with the Sherpas, is they don't dictate to you. So I said, okay, let's carry on for a bit more. So I climbed for, I think, another half an hour, but the wind was so bad, so intense. And I remember getting to a point where I'd now already stepped, not over, but past people where I already decided enough for their body. And that's a stark reminder when you're at that sort of knife edge on Mount Everest, that where you are, it literally, if you have any doubt as to where you are, then the people around you, how they respond to the conditions, will give you a very, very quick understanding. So, it's a bit like being in a war zone, but you also know you're above 8,000 meters, and any little mistake you make is potentially fatal. So eventually I looked up at some of the Sherpas ahead of us, and they were, because people can't speak with their oxygen masks on, they literally were telling people to stop or turn back type of thing, because they were fixing ropes and they couldn't do it fast enough because of the weather. And I made the decision of that turn around. Because when you've put in all of that work, it's an 18-month, in fact, some people start 2 years before the time. I'm giving 18 months as a sort of rounded figure. Most of us start a year and a half before the time with your physical prep anyway. And then all of the financial sacrifice, the sacrifice of time with family, so yeah, it all adds up. And then you get to that point, if I take you back to my last expedition on Everest, where I was literally 550 vertical meters from the summit. And to get to this, after all of that work, sacrifice, putting in focus, whatever it took, to get to the decision that actually it's not going to happen. It's tough, and the thing is, you can't crawl into a ball because you're at above 8,000 meters, and there's your oxygen tank's going to run out of oxygen. So you've got to kind of be quite decisive. It's a hard decision, but it has to be a clean decision. You've got to be quite decisive about it. Turn around, go back to camp. At that point, camp was about 2 hours away. So you can't beat yourself up for the 2 hours of descending back to the 8,000-meter camp, for having made the decision. So it's literally in the moment. What do you need to do next for survival, and next for survival, and next for survival, until you're actually in a safe space, which is Everest Base Camp in this case. But it is a thing of, there's an aftershock, there's an after effect of realizing the impact of the decision you'd made. And then you go into a kind of anger with yourself. How could I have made that decision? And did I do it correctly? So you start doubting. As a high performance person, you also doubt whether you've done the right thing. So that's the thing, is you go, well, if the weather had changed, and what if I'd done this? But in that moment, you probably made the best decision you could for the circumstances you were under. And that's the thing about one's inner game, is you need to kind of find the mechanisms with your inner game to make the right decisions if circumstances go haywire. The right decision for your own self-preservation, but also the right decision to be able to tackle a thing at another time, or to tackle a different thing in the right way the next time. And these are tough ones, because you in the moment don't know the impact or the aftermath of the choices that you're making.
If external circumstances then kind of dictate that you have to turn back because in the moment that looks like the right thing, or or everybody else is turning around, as you were telling, where Sherpas were telling you to move away, we can't get the ropes fixed, it's not safe, there's no infrastructure, there's nothing to support your journey, even if you were to decide. Should you then feel guilty if external circumstances dictate that you make that decision, where you almost have no choice? And that happens very often in business, where during tough economic times, or when you see things going south, or when an industry changes around you and you just can't keep up, or your clients can't keep up. When circumstances force you to make a proactive safety decision, should you feel guilty about it, and why do we feel guilty?
Yeah, that's exactly the point, is one shouldn't feel guilty, but because we're human beings with emotions, there are emotions that you can theorize until the cows come home, but the point is one still has an emotional response to the choices that you've made, whether they were the clinically correct choice to make or not. And that's why it's so important now to discuss how people under the difficult circumstances, the world is changing so rapidly right now. There's so many things that are going to come in the next few months and years that we have to have a rapid, effective response to. And how do you manage those emotions? Because a lot of decisions to let go of some stuff will need to be made. A lot of decisions to adapt to new things will need to be made, and they'll need to be made fairly quickly. And human behavior is a very, very interesting thing in that dynamic, because people don't necessarily change habits and behaviors very quickly. So in a time of rapid response, how do you change behavior quickly? And of course, the behavior when a disappointment comes is to crawl into a ball. Oh, I feel so sorry for myself. And how resilient are we to make a quick turnaround and go for the next thing? So guilt might be an emotion that's, you can't help it because it's emotional, but to what extent? How long do you sort of allow yourself to wallow in that? And to what extent is that sort of delaying your response time so that you're not at peak performance when the time requires of you to kind of up your game?
As leaders, do we have a choice though? Because if you're making a decision that doesn't only impact you and impact the business you've been running or the business that you own, but you're now making a decision on behalf of others that in a time of crisis don't have a say. It's not a consultative process. As you said, it's the clinically correct decision at that time with the facts presented to you. Can leaders have those emotions from a peak performance? Because you talk a lot about the peak performance toolkit that you've created. From a peak performance point of view, is there space for balance between feeling emotions, going through it, not curling up into a ball, and just getting on with it? Because surely, if leaders then make decisions on behalf of others, and they should shorten the time it takes to grieve the closing of a business or the closing of an era, etc., but they should still be driving others towards peak performance. Explain that balance to me a little bit.
Yeah, it is balance because, you know, as a leader, you're still, and this is the component that we must not lose in this time of digitization. We still have human beings with real emotions, with irrational responses to things. And so as a leader, we need to connect really closely with our human side so that we can engage with empathy and sympathy. I try to be quite with my team where the struggles are, you know, the things that I'm really finding quite difficult. I try to support them as much as possible in terms of their own response to the clinical decision that needs to be made. But at the end of the day, our people need to kind of see a barometer from us on how we handle it. So if we're going to panic mode, then we cannot exactly expect the people we are leading to be quite, you know, smooth sailing, don't panic, this is not a worry. People get their cues from us. So as leaders, we need to really have, our self-mastery needs to be intact. So one of the areas of effectiveness in the peak performance toolkit is self-mastery, is how do we master ourselves under all circumstances? How resilient are we? Where are our levels of motivation? What do we see as our locus of control? Is it internal and external? So these are factors that play a huge role, and people are looking for those cues in a leader. That when a crisis hits and we panic, they don't trust our leadership anymore. And then it's kind of like a rudderless boat, you know. So I always take a stance of slowing down mentally and emotionally a little bit, assessing a situation quickly, and then giving my response to it. So that it doesn't look like there's panic. It must look like whatever decision you've come to, even if it's a quick one, you've actually thought it through fairly rapidly. And
how were you enabled? Because I get, yeah, I get what you're saying. When you were back in South Africa after your summit attempt and your body was absolutely shattered with that summit attempt alone, it's not easy in those circumstances, life and business, to you know, pull from your self-mastery, pull from what you know from yourself. What did you do in those shattered times? How much did you allow yourself to wallow? How much did you allow yourself to be hurt? And how can we translate that into when we get hurt in business?
Yeah, so I remember, I mean, our failure was a very public one because the media had been following us, and, you know, people knew. By the time we came back, everyone wanted answers. Why did you turn back? Because people who are armchair spectators don't necessarily understand the conditions. And we didn't live stream things on Facebook back then as we do now, you know, so it was almost impossible to show people why the decision had to be made. So I had a lot of radio interviews, media interviews to explain the decision, and that in itself is hard because you're beating yourself up for the failure, and now you've got to kind of put a positive spin on it, you know, and justify why so much effort has gone into something that actually didn't work. And that happens in business. Sometimes we rally our teams and we get them all riled up, and we're going to do this thing with 5-year strategies in place, and then the market shifts, something happens. That's like the weather on Everest, you know, something happens, you didn't see it coming, and now everyone's just deflated again. And with your own disappointment, you now have to still justify that some of the decisions you're making not to continue have to be made for the self-preservation of the team, for some of the things that are existing to keep going, and for some new direction to be taken. And that's hard because then you've got to pick people up again, rally them again, inspire them again. You know, that's the tough part of it. How do you cope with it in terms of your own disappointment? Is you make time. When you're not in the public face where people are requiring your leadership and they're looking for positive signs from you, I think it's so important to acknowledge that there's a disappointment that is there anyway. So I used to kind of, I remember at a time when I was single and climbing and I'd have a summit disappointment, I would literally just have these weekends where I'm not contacting anyone, where I just spend time processing what has happened. But you can't do that now that I'm a working mom and a wife.
There's no time for alone and time for processing.
I literally take a bath, and you know, I take long baths, and just in case someone says, "Well, dare you take a bath when there's water scarcity?" I take a bath first, then my kids jump in.
There you go, noted, specified. So for me, peak performance, this challenges my thinking around peak performance, because when I started in my career, it was still in the phase where peak performance is never saying no, never lying down, doesn't matter how you feel, doesn't matter what the circumstances are. Peak performance is always on. It translates into an always on culture and always on brilliantly. What I'm hearing you saying is that peak performance from a sustained point of view, especially in the face of massive disappointment that was triggered by circumstances out of your control, is less about keeping going and more about knowing when to back off. What do you do during those times of backing off? Is it just sitting and staring at the wall and watching paint dry, or do you have a 5-step process or a 3-step process that you force your mind through?
I like that question because my soapbox for the last, I don't know, over a decade now has been that we make the wrong assumption about peak performance. Peak performance is not about go, go, go. And I'll give you a few quick examples. If you look at birds, birds are, air creatures. They fly around, right? But when they need to replenish, when they need to sleep, when they need to eat, when they need to bath, they come down. And aeroplanes, who are also air creatures, man-made, they don't stay up there. They come down. They need to refuel. They need to get cleaned up. They need to be maintained. So the idea that peak performance is always to be at the very top of your game is a fallacy. It's a misnomer. And so when I use the Everest analogy to explain peak performance to people, I always talk about the process of climbing Everest has iterations of returning to base camp for days.
I remember that, and I remember I was so frustrated when you showed us the picture of how this works, and just this takes forever. So please do go through it in detail because it's really important to understand.
Exactly. So the process of climbing, not just arrive in base camp and you go camp 1, camp 2, camp 3, camp 4, and then you're at the summit. It doesn't work like that. So the mountain is quite big, the air is quite thin, your body has to adjust to the altitude and to the lack of oxygen. So it's more like a case of you get to base camp, spend a few days there, then you go up to camp 1 and you spend a night or 2 there, then you come back down to base camp and you spend a couple of days more in base camp. Now base camp is 5,350 somewhat meters above sea level. So you're already at high altitude when you're doing this. Then you're up to camp 1, go up to camp 2, sleep a night in camp 2, come back to camp 1, come back to base camp, spend a few days in base camp, then back to camp 1, to camp 2, to camp 3, sleep a night in camp 3, come back to camp 2. So it is an iterative process and you rotate constantly back to base camp or even lower in some cases in order to acclimatize your body for the high altitudes. People who don't do this suffer tremendously and they usually die. So for me, peak performance is about understanding where to place your base camp moments in your trajectory. So if you're a person looking to do a sports match, let's say, then in the run-up to that, there needs to be very specific times where you rest and eat and you say, guys, I'm going to sleep for the next 8 hours, I should not be disturbed. Or for the next 12 hours, and I should. But then when you get back, you put your all in. But those rest periods, those base camp moments are vital to peak performance. And this is where we get it wrong. When I do strategic sessions to help companies understand why strategy often fails, is that they don't build deliberate base camp moments, those check-in moments. Where are we now in relation to where we want to be? How's our resources? Are we still replenishing resources on the way? What the team doing? Is everyone still coping with the pace at which we're going? Strategy is as important. The base camp moments are as important a moment in the strategy as we're going to reach this amount of profit by 2 years from now. And so I often encourage my clients to do a mid-strategic review where you're like 5-year strategy, let's do something at 1 year, let's do something at 2 years, let's do something at 2.5 years. And just recently I helped a company realize that they actually needed to let go of a non-profit making asset that was draining their capital. Because they did a mid-strategic review. But if they just kept going because they've now made the strategic plan and then they're going to discover 5 years later they should have gotten rid of that thing, that's the risk we take. Okay, the strategy said, let's just go. Without the base camp moments, how do you know that you're still on track with all the market forces that's happening, with your people coming and going? Life is so dynamic and business is so dynamic. We cannot afford do not do camp moments. And I think that is so part of the peak performance toolkit. It's the check-in times that really inform you.
Yeah, we can also not afford to hold on to this was the plan. I mean, you yourself said the plan was to summit. The plan was to put in all of this effort with this one single thing as the ultimate. And if you chose to have that ultimate, if you chose to have the summit, the world wouldn't have had Deshun anymore. We wouldn't have been having that chat because you would have had that one thing, but to the detriment and the cost of everything else. And that's what I find often in business is if you don't have these base camp moments, then you keep things alive. You never pause and say, well, let's look at everything I do in business, even if it's the crown jewels. Let's look at it and ask, is it still relevant in the current situation? It's the hardest thing to say, no, it's not. Thank you very much for serving me, but there you go to the archives. That's where you have to stay now, and I've got to move on. There's one other thing I was wondering about in this drive for peak performance and in these base camp moments. Isn't it terrifying to be back at base camp, to just sit? One, you must be super bored, and two, it must be super frustrating to kind of feel okay and want to push for that summit. Is it merely just a mental game knowing that these base camp moments, these pauses, in my team, I'm very strict. No work past 5, no work over weekends. That's the planned base camp areas that we do on a regular basis. What do you do during those times when your mind starts freaking out and the anxiety starts rising, saying, I should be doing something, I'm feeling like I'm not doing anything?
Yeah, so interesting. So one's inner game has to do with your thoughts and your words. So when you start saying things like I should and I have to, then psychologically you're setting yourself up for making mistakes and for doing things that are hard. Okay, so let's just use have to, for instance. Have to, in psychological terms, is a coercive motivation. So whether someone else tells you you have to do something or you tell yourself you have to, it's coercive. So think about the last time you said to yourself, I have to finish this report, or I have to sit down and study.
Yes.
When we do shoulds and have tos, the first thing that happens is creative avoidance. We find kinds of things that have no relevance to the task at hand that suddenly becomes most important, like your favorite TV program or whatever.
Yeah.
The second thing that happens is slovenly work. So we sort of push ourselves to the last minute, and then we give a minimum output that is required, and that's not peak performance. You want to be able to give your best, right? The third thing that happens is it's creative avoidance, slovenly work, and then we tend to find a procrastination. I can't do it now. And these things are all sort of interlinked with each other. And the minute we find ourselves doing either one of those three things, the question we must ask is, am I making this a have to, or am I making it a choose to, like to, love to, it's my idea?
Okay.
So if you can turn a have to into a choose to, like to, love to, it's my idea, you are rewiring your inner game to enjoy the task at hand. So whether it's a report, oh, I'm so curious to find out what I'm going to discover in this report. That's a different way of saying I have to write this report. Whether it's an exam, oh, I'm really keen to see if I can up my exam results by 2%. So peak performance and your inner game has to that make us go, well, I should and I shouldn't, and I have to and I don't have to, because we are setting ourselves up for doing less than our best when we do have to and should. So back to your question, my first strategy when I'm in base camp is I don't think about the mountain.
You're on the mountain, you don't think about the mountain?
The nice thing about being in Everest Base Camp is you can't see the top of the mountain. You can see a little section of the icefall and part of Lhotse, which is a mountain next to Everest, but you can't actually see the mountain. And what that does is it gives you a mental and emotional break from the climbing process. Because another thing about your inner game is if you're thinking about climbing all the time, you're using up mental energy for the climb. Okay, so by the time you're actually on the climb, you're exhausted because now you've done it so many times. So part of your mental inner game is, even though you're on the mountain, you don't have to think about climbing the whole time. You can distract yourself with other things. So we have lots of books, we have card games, we chat to other people, we visit other campsites. The time that you're supposed to do base camp, it's about replenishing, it's about reloading, it's about recalibrating, it's about maintaining your gear, making sure there's no cracks or, you know, your crampons are sharpened. It's all of those little, sometimes it's mundane things. But you keep your brain busy with something that's in the service of the goal, but you're not thinking of climbing the whole time, because mentally and emotionally you will be exhausted by the time you do the actual physical climbing. So that's the first thing I do, is a kind of disassociation.
In business, that translates into, I can't sharpen my crampons because I don't have any. But I can do housekeeping. I can look at my policies, my procedures, my governance structures, my people, my performance review. I can look at my marketing basics, my sales basics, my delivery basics, my processes. I can do all of these basics of business, these homework things, when business is not in a period of peak delivery in terms of profits, then it's time for housekeeping.
Exactly.
Yes, next step.
That is what I like in the crampons, because it's mundane work, and so now you need to watch out for the have-tos, right? So you've got to go, even though this is not stuff that I have to do every single day, I choose to love to. It's my idea, because once I'm on the mountain, I need to trust that this stuff works.
Okay.
And I think, you know, we get that so wrong in business and in teams, in any teams, you know, the mundane stuff, the basic things like, we've done that, you know, now that the policy is in a nice file, we just put it on a shelf somewhere. No one has to revisit it until there's a crisis, of course.
Yes, and then suddenly, this is out of date. We have never thought about this. No one in our business thinks about things like this. We do not know what to do. And it wasn't during the peak performance moments, it was during the base camp moments that those things were supposed to be, that we chose, that business owners should choose to sharpen the crampons.
Correct, yeah. It's about the team. The thing we tend to do as team is we sit down, we obviously have a good time together, we play cards, we share stories and so on. But you also then check your nutrition. Are you still eating correctly? Are you sleeping enough? Are you seeing to that wound that you may have picked up somewhere along the line from a fall or a clip of something? Or it's maintenance time. And maintenance can happen as you climb, but much more if you make it happen, if it's a deliberate base camp. The team is going into base camp mode for the next 3 days. Let's unpack these things and check. Where's everyone on the team? What kind of support do you need for you to go a little bit further? They seem like nice to have things, but they're actually essential.
Your next step then, after you have chosen, liked to, loved, and I forget the rest, after you've done that, what then? After you've checked the basics, what's the next steps for your inner game?
Well, remember, you are in a process, so it is about waiting it out until the team then decide, okay, we're going to leave again for the next high camp at a certain time, at a certain hour. So typically on Everest, you wake up at about 3 in the morning. In base camp, it's about minus 25 to minus 30 degrees Celsius outside when this is all happening. And of course, the sun isn't out yet, so it's pitch dark. So you've got to be able to get yourself out of the sleeping bag, put on your stuff, your gear, your protective gear, your harness, your climbing boots. You've got to be able to focus very quickly on getting that stuff sorted. Get to the mess tent, take in whatever you can. It's usually just a hot cup of tea. And off you go. And basically your ascent up through the icefall is in darkness. So to have the mental focus, I'm not a morning person, let me tell you. I struggle to wake up on a Joburg winter. But when you're on Everest, it's your choose to, like to, want to that makes you get up. So it's that thing of, oh my goodness, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, it's so freezing outside. I don't want to let myself down on this climb, and I certainly don't want to let my team down. So let me just shut up and do it, you know. So another part of your inner game is there are times when you must talk hard stuff with yourself. It's just that, oh, this is hard, well, shut up and do it. Oh, that's painful, well, sorry, just ignore it and keep climbing. So it's not just the warm and fuzzy, oh, how do I feel in the moment? Sometimes, how do I feel in the moment? Because I really want to continue. I want to sit here and just let the whole thing wave over me. So in those moments, you've got to sort of go, my inner game is a tough one. I'm in a tough environment, and I've got to just shut up and pull myself up and go. So yes, it's a positive and constructive self-talk is not soft and fuzzy. You kind of get up, you speak to yourself like that, you do all the requirements, all the basic things, you double check your harness, you double check your boots, you make sure your crampons are fixed correctly, you get a team member to do the same for you. So you've got a buddy system where everyone checks for each other, whether harnesses are looped, double back looped, and whether all the tools that you need for the day are on your harness and so on. So there's a buddy system that holds you not just accountable for yourself, but for others as well. And then we go, okay, we're setting off, we're going up the mountain now. Everyone knows what's required of them. They know how to self-manage while they're doing this, which is part of high performance teams, is each person must be counted on to self-manage. You mustn't sit there going, well, someone's going to rescue me if something goes wrong. The better question is, exactly. So the better question is, when something goes wrong, am I a reliable person? Who can I rely on? Am I that person? Because if you are, then you're basically self-managing at high performance. But if you're going, my bag's so heavy, maybe if something goes wrong, I can hand it over to so-and-so, that's not peak performance thinking. So your inner game is really about managing everything that you can possibly manage for yourself at the highest level that you possibly can, and being there for team before team says we need you to be there, that kind of thing. But also not going, well, I can trust so-and-so, so I'll just climb with them. The question is, am I trustworthy? Who wants to climb with me on this journey? And those are tough questions if you're in a team.
It has been incredible talking to you. Once again, I have a few notes that I need to go and start, not just listening and admiring, but actually implementing. But the three key takeaways for me is this: during times of massive disappointment, not brought on by your own choices, but brought on by extreme external circumstances that are really dangerous or threatening to your environment, plan your base camps. Actually plan them. Don't wait for them to happen, because they will never happen on themselves. Plan them. Choose. Don't be a victim of have tos and should haves, but choose to, love to, like to, and I forget the other one. And 3 is a buddy system. Don't try to do the massive disappointments in life alone. Don't try to do business alone, just because the internet has created this thing of superheroes that seem to stand alone, but they are surrounded by good people and good teams.
Yeah, I think if I could just summarize that, I think the 4IR season that is emerging quite strongly now is going to teach us how to collaborate. And if we're not able to do that, we're not going to be relevant anymore, because, collaboration is so key. It's not about hanging all of your expectations on another person's expertise, but it's about realizing that the old way, the 20th century way of buying out competition and elbowing people out the way and backstabbing to get ahead, it's not relevant anymore. So it's a new game. And we've got to play it through collaboration. And so I'm quite excited to see, how these kind of digital platforms creates the collaborative environments that, you and I are now collaborating, and we're pretty much in the same kind of environment in terms of the work that we do, but I don't see you as competition and you don't see me as competition. In fact, what we're seeing is how can we bring our expertise together to create value in a way that we probably wouldn't have done in the 20th century. So I'm very excited to see that unfold.
Fantastic. Deshun, it has been such a pleasure. Thank you for joining me. We'll do this again soon.
We will. Thank you so much.
Bye.